Life. The judge says it. Then the black teen stuns everyone with one call. Life. Judge Catherine Williams' gavel echoed through the Chicago federal courthouse like a death knell. But when the 18-year-old defendant asked for his one phone call, nobody expected him to dial a number that would shatter everything she thought she knew about justice, and herself. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow, I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. The fluorescent lights of Cook County Courthouse in Chicago hummed with the same mechanical indifference that had governed Judge Catherine Williams' life for the past 15 years. She sat in her chambers, staring at the case file that would define her afternoon. People v. Deshaun Thompson. Armed robbery. Aggravated assault. Third strike. At 47, Catherine had presided over thousands of cases, but lately, each verdict felt like another brick in the wall she'd built around her heart. The framed photo on her desk, a smiling 8-year-old girl with pigtails, seemed to watch her with accusing eyes. What would Emma think of the woman you've become? Catherine pushed the thought away, straightening her black robes. The law was the law. Emotions were luxuries she couldn't afford, not anymore. Not since that rainy night in Detroit 12 years ago when a drunk driver took away the only person who'd ever called her mama. 3 floors below, 18-year-old Deshaun Thompson sat shackled in the defendant's holding cell, his dark eyes fixed on the concrete wall. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on his lean frame. He'd lost 20 pounds since his arrest 6 months ago. His court-appointed attorney had been clear. This was it. 3 strikes meant life without parole. 18 years old, and this is how my story ends. Deshaun thought about his grandmother's warnings, her weathered hands gripping his shoulders in their cramped apartment on Chicago's South Side. "Baby, these streets don't love you back," she'd whispered. But Grandma Rose had been gone 3 years now, and the streets were all he'd known since aging out of foster care at 17. He flexed his fingers, feeling the small scar on his palm from when he was 7, a burn from touching a hot stove while trying to cook for himself in his 3rd foster home. That scar reminded him that he'd been surviving on his own long before the system labeled him a criminal. Thompson. The bailiff's voice cut through his thoughts. "Time to face the music, kid." Deshaun stood slowly, the chains around his ankles clinking against the cold floor. Through the small window, he could see the Chicago skyline, Willis Tower stretching toward clouds that looked heavy with snow. Somewhere out there was the life he'd never get to live. Judge Williams entered the courtroom with practiced precision, her heels clicking against the marble floors of the historic building that had seen countless young men like Deshaun disappear into the system. She'd read his file 3 times. No family, no permanent address, a string of petty crimes that escalated after his grandmother's death. Just another statistic. But as she looked down at the young man standing before her bench, something flickered in her chest, a recognition she couldn't quite name. Deshaun stood straight despite his chains, his chin raised with a dignity that seemed at odds with his circumstances. "Deshaun Marcus Thompson," Catherine began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You have been found guilty by a jury of your peers on all counts. Given your prior convictions under Illinois' 3-strike law, I am required to impose the maximum sentence." She paused, studying the young man's face. He wasn't looking at her with the hatred or defiance she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, his eyes held something that made her uncomfortable: acceptance. Not the broken kind, but the steady acceptance of someone who'd stopped believing in miracles long ago. "Before I pronounce the sentence," Catherine continued, "do you have anything to say to this court?" Deshawn was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, older than his 18 years. "Your Honor, I ain't gonna stand here and lie to you or to myself. I did what they said I did. But I want you to know, I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I was just—" He swallowed hard. "I was just trying to survive." Catherine felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. She'd heard similar words hundreds of times, but something in his tone, a quiet honesty without self-pity, caught her off guard. "Focus, Catherine. The law is clear." "Mr. Thompson," she said, lifting her gavel, "having considered all factors, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The word life echoed through the courtroom like thunder. But instead of the usual breakdown or outburst, Deshawn simply nodded once, closing his eyes briefly as if absorbing the weight of forever. "Your Honor," his attorney interjected, "my client would like to exercise his right to one phone call before being transferred to Stateville Correctional Center." Catherine glanced at the clock. It was 3:47 p.m. on a gray February afternoon in Chicago. In 15 minutes, Deshawn Thompson would disappear into the Illinois prison system, likely never to be seen again. "Granted," she said. "Court is adjourned." As the bailiffs prepared to escort Deshawn out, he looked up at her one more time. "Thank you for listening, Your Honor. That meant something." Catherine watched him shuffle toward the door, chains clinking with each step, and felt something crack inside the wall she'd built around her heart. She didn't yet know that in 10 minutes, everything she thought she knew about justice, and about herself, would be forever changed. What do you think Deshawn is feeling at this moment? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to find strength in your darkest hour? Share your thoughts below. The phone booth in the courthouse basement felt like a confessional. Cramped, dimly lit, and heavy with the weight of last words. Deshawn's shackled hands trembled as he lifted the receiver, the cold plastic slick against his palm. Officer Martinez stood 3 feet away, arms crossed, checking his watch. "Make it quick, Thompson. Transport leaves at 5. Deshawn stared at the rotary dial, his mind racing. Who do you call when your life is over? His grandmother was gone. His foster siblings were scattered across the country. The few friends he'd had were either dead or locked up themselves. But there was one number, burned into his memory from a business card he'd carried in his wallet for 3 years, too afraid and too proud to ever use it. A number from Detroit. With steady fingers, he dialed 3135550-847. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 floors above, Judge Catherine Williams sat in her chambers, mechanically signing deportation orders when her personal cell phone buzzed against her mahogany desk. The Detroit area code made her freeze. She hadn't received a call from Michigan in over a decade. "Hello. Is this?" Deshawn's voice cracked. "Is this Catherine Williams?" Catherine's pen stopped moving. Something in the young man's voice, vulnerable, desperate, achingly familiar, made her chest tighten. "Yes, this is Judge Williams." "Who is this?" "My name is Deshawn Thompson. I think you might have known my mama, Emma Thompson." The world stopped. The pen slipped from Catherine's fingers, clattering onto the stack of legal documents. Emma. Sweet, laughing Emma with the gap-toothed smile and pigtails, who used to call her Mama Kate, even though the adoption was never finalized. Emma, who died in her arms in Detroit Children's Hospital while they waited for a kidney that never came. That's not possible, Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible. Emma died when she was 8. Kidney failure. I was her foster mother. No, ma'am. Deshawn's voice was gentle, patient. Emma was my mama. She died 3 years ago in Chicago when I was 15. But before she passed, she told me about a lady in Detroit who tried to adopt her. A lady who loved her like her own daughter. She said if I ever needed help, if I ever got in real trouble, I should find Catherine Williams. Catherine's hand pressed against her chest, feeling her heart hammer against her ribs. The room seemed to spin. Emma alive? Grown up? A mother? I don't understand, she managed. The hospital said she died. I held her hand. I was there when. Mama said they made a mistake, Deshawn continued, his voice growing stronger. Said her kidney function came back at the last minute. But by then, you'd already left Detroit. She said she tried to find you for years, but you'd moved away. Tears Catherine hadn't shed in over a decade began sliding down her cheeks. Emma, alive for all those years. Having a baby. Living a life Catherine never got to witness. She named you after someone special, Catherine whispered, remembering. She always said she wanted to name her first son Deshawn after her favorite teacher. Miss Deshawn Carter at Lincoln Elementary, Deshawn confirmed, and Catherine could hear him crying now too. Mama told me that story 100 times. Officer Martinez stepped closer. Wrap it up, kid. Wait, Catherine said urgently into the phone. Deshawn, where are you calling from? Cook County Courthouse in Chicago. I just got sentenced to life in prison. I'm about to be transferred to Stateville, and I just wanted someone to know that Emma's son existed, that she raised me to be better than I turned out to be. Catherine was already standing, her chair rolling backward into the bookshelf. Legal briefs scattered to the floor as she grabbed her coat. What courtroom? What judge? Courtroom 304. Judge Catherine Williams. The irony hit her like a physical blow. She had just sentenced Emma's son, the child of the little girl she'd loved and lost, to spend the rest of his life in prison. The boy Emma had raised alone, while Catherine built walls around her heart and called it justice. Oh God, Catherine breathed. Oh Emma, what have I done? Ma'am, you still there? Catherine was running now, her heels clicking against the marble corridors as she raced toward the elevator. Court officers and attorneys pressed against the walls, staring at the usually composed judge who was crying openly, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Deshawn, listen to me very carefully, she said, stabbing the elevator button. Don't let them transfer you. Tell them Judge Williams needs to see you immediately. Tell them there's been a procedural error. I don't understand. Emma's watching over you, Catherine whispered, stepping into the elevator. She brought you to me. After all these years, she brought her baby home. The line went quiet except for the sound of both of them crying. Mama Kate. Deshawn whispered, using the name his mother had taught him. Is that really you? Catherine closed her eyes, remembering 8-year-old Emma's arms around her neck, the smell of hospital antiseptic and strawberry shampoo, the promise she'd made to love her forever. "Yes, baby," she whispered back. "I'm coming to get you." In the courthouse basement, Deshaun Thompson, Emma's son, the grandson Catherine never knew she had, held onto the phone receiver as if it were hope itself. For the first time in 3 years, since his mama died alone in a Chicago hospital bed, he wasn't facing the darkness alone. And 3 floors above, Judge Catherine Williams was discovering that sometimes the law serves justice, and sometimes love does. The elevator doors opened onto the 3rd floor, and Catherine Williams ran toward courtroom 304. Toward the miracle she thought she'd lost forever, wrapped in chains and dressed in orange, but alive and calling her name. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed your understanding of your past? Sometimes the people we've lost find ways to bring us exactly what we need. What's your take on this incredible connection? Judge Catherine Williams sat frozen in her chambers, her hands trembling as she stared at the phone that had just gone silent. The echoes of Deshaun's words still rang in her ears. "Mama Cat, it's me, your baby boy." Impossible. Emma died 12 years ago. She pressed her palms against her mahogany desk, trying to steady herself. The rational part of her mind, the part that had survived law school at Northwestern, that had climbed the ranks in Chicago's brutal legal system, that had buried her daughter and built a career on the ashes, screamed that this was some kind of cruel joke. Deshaun Thompson couldn't be Emma. Emma was her biological daughter. Emma had died in that hospital bed in Detroit, her small hand growing cold in Catherine's grip. Emma was buried in Graceland Cemetery under a headstone that read, "Beloved daughter, forever 8." Catherine's breathing grew shallow. She reached for the crystal paperweight Emma had given her for Mother's Day, their last Mother's Day, and clutched it against her chest. "No," she whispered to the empty room. "No, this is not happening." Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the courthouse holding area, Deshaun sat on the concrete bench, his own hand shaking as he processed what had just occurred. The corrections officer had given him 5 minutes with the phone, standard procedure before transport to Stateville. He'd dialed the number he'd memorized from a crumpled piece of paper his grandmother had given him years ago, the only clue to his past before the foster system. The number she'd made him promise to call, "If you ever get in real trouble, baby." Real trouble. "Tell them who you really are," Grandma Rose had whispered on her deathbed. "Tell them about the fire." But when that familiar voice had answered, older, wearier, but unmistakably the voice from his earliest memories, Deshaun's carefully constructed walls had crumbled. "Officer, I think I made a mistake," Deshaun called out to the guard. "Can I make another call?" "You get 1 call, Thompson. That's the law." Deshaun closed his eyes, remembering fragments he'd spent years trying to forget. A woman with kind eyes reading him bedtime stories, the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings, being called baby boy in a voice that made him feel safe. Then the fire, the smoke, the confusion, waking up in a hospital with strangers who called him Deshaun, because that's what was written on a bracelet they'd found with him. But my name was something else before. Before the fire. Before. David, he whispered to himself. My name was David. Back in her chambers, Catherine was pacing like a caged animal. She'd built her entire identity around being rational, controlled, unshakable. The woman who'd never lost a case as a prosecutor. The judge who'd never shown favoritism or emotion on the bench. This boy is trying to manipulate you. It's a con. Criminals do this. They research judges, find their weaknesses. But even as she told herself this, her fingers were moving across her computer keyboard, pulling up Deshawn's case file with trembling hands. Born approximately 18 years ago. Found as a child with severe burns and smoke inhalation. No family is located. Memory loss due to trauma. The room spun around her. Catherine grabbed her phone and dialed her sister Rachel in Los Angeles. Rachel answered on the second ring. "Kath, what's wrong? You sound..." "Rachel, I need you to tell me about the fire again. About Emma. About that night in Detroit." Silence stretched across the line from Chicago to California. "Catherine, honey, we've been through this," the counselor said. "Just tell me." Catherine's voice cracked. "Please, I need to hear it again." Rachel's voice grew gentle, careful. "There was an electrical fire in the apartment below yours. You got Emma out, but she was overcome by smoke. The paramedics worked on her for 40 minutes. But, Kath, she was gone. You were there. You held her hand when she..." "But her body," Catherine interrupted, her voice barely audible. "At the funeral, the casket was closed because of the burns." "Yes, because you couldn't bear to see her that way." "Catherine, what's going on? Why are you asking about this now?" Catherine hung up without answering. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. In the holding cell, Deshawn was fighting his own battle with denial. The smart play was to stay quiet, accept his fate, and do his time. Getting involved with some judge's emotional breakdown would only make things worse. But what if she really is? He thought about the dreams that had haunted him for years. Dreams of a woman with warm brown eyes who sang him lullabies, who called him her little prince, who promised she'd never let anything bad happen to him. Dreams that the foster care counselors had dismissed as trauma fantasies. "Thompson transports here," the guard announced. Deshawn stood, the chains heavy around his wrists. Through the barred window, he could see the prison van waiting outside, its engine running, exhaust visible in the cold Chicago air. This is it. Last chance. "Officer, I need to speak to Judge Williams. It's about the case." The guard laughed. "Son, you just got sentenced to life. The judge ain't interested in hearing from you." "Please," Deshawn said, and something in his voice made the guard pause. Tell her David needs to see his mama." The guard's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. "What did you say?" "Just tell her that, please. David needs to see his mama." Catherine was standing at her window, looking out at Lake Michigan in the distance, when her clerk knocked. "Judge Williams? I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a strange message from the holding area. The Thompson boy says he needs to speak with you. He said to tell you that David needs to see his mama." The crystal paperweight slipped from Catherine's hands, shattering against the hardwood floor. David. That was Emma's middle name. Emma David Williams. The name I whispered to her every night before bed. But Emma was gone. Emma was buried. Emma was... Catherine's legs gave out, and she sank into her leather chair, her world tilting on its axis. Every logical part of her mind was screaming that this was impossible, that grief was making her see connections that didn't exist. But deep in her chest, in a place she'd thought had died with her daughter, something was stirring back to life. What if the impossible was possible? What if God or fate or chance was offering her the one thing she'd prayed for every night for 12 years. "Tell the transport to wait," she heard herself saying. "Bring him to my chambers." The emergency at Cook County Hospital had thrown the entire judicial district into chaos. A gas leak in the courthouse basement meant immediate evacuation, and with Deshawn's transfer paperwork incomplete due to the emergency, he found himself in an unprecedented situation. Handcuffed to a bench in the hospital's secure waiting area alongside Judge Catherine Williams, who had been brought in after inhaling fumes during the evacuation. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "This is highly irregular," Catherine muttered, adjusting her position on the uncomfortable plastic chair. Her black robes had been replaced with a hospital gown after the medical team insisted on keeping her for observation. The dignity of her office felt stripped away, leaving her feeling oddly vulnerable. Deshawn sat 3 feet away, still in his orange jumpsuit, his right wrist cuffed to the same metal bench. "Yeah, well, my whole life's been irregular, Your Honor. This is just Tuesday for me." The waiting area buzzed with typical hospital chaos. Nurses rushing past, monitors beeping, the distant sound of ambulances arriving at Chicago's busiest trauma center. But in their small corner, an uncomfortable silence stretched between them. "I'm sorry about your grandmother," Catherine said suddenly, surprising herself. She'd read it in his file, but sitting here, stripped of her judicial robes and authority, it felt important to acknowledge his loss as one human to another. Deshawn's jaw tightened. "You read my file." "I read everyone's file. But you don't usually apologize for what's in them." Catherine studied his profile. Even in chains, there was something dignified about the way he carried himself. "No, I don't." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the controlled chaos of the hospital around them. A young mother rushed past, clutching a crying toddler. An elderly man in a wheelchair was being pushed toward the elevator by his adult son. Life continued, families intact, while they sat frozen in this strange moment between verdict and imprisonment. "She raised me from when I was 9, Deshawn said quietly, his voice barely audible above the hospital noise. "Rose Thompson. Not my real grandmother, but she took me in when nobody else would. Said I reminded her of her grandson who died young." Catherine found herself listening more intently than she had to anything in years. "She used to make these Sunday dinners, you know? Nothing fancy, just cornbread and collard greens, maybe some chicken if we were lucky. But she'd set the table like we were having company. 'Deshawn,' she'd say, 'just 'cause we ain't got much don't mean we can't have dignity.'" His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman," Catherine said softly. "She was. She worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and still found time to help me with homework every night. Made me promise I'd graduate high school, go to college maybe." Deshawn laughed bitterly. "Guess I let her down there." Catherine felt something stirring in her chest, a familiar ache she'd tried to bury for 12 years. "I'm sure she knew you loved her." "How do you know?" Deshawn turned to look at her directly for the first time. "You got kids, Judge Williams?" The question hit like a physical blow. Catherine's hand instinctively moved toward her chest, where she used to wear Emma's small silver heart necklace before she forced herself to put it away. I had a daughter once." The words came out before she could stop them. She never talked about Emma. Not to colleagues, not to friends, not to the therapist she'd seen for exactly 3 sessions before deciding that grief was something to be managed, not healed. Deshawn must have heard something in her voice because his expression softened. She was 8. Car accident in Detroit, where I used to practice family law. Catherine's voice was steady, clinical, the way she'd trained herself to speak about it. A drunk driver ran a red light. Emma was walking home from school. "I'm sorry," Deshawn said, and the simple sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. "It was a long time ago." "It doesn't matter how long. That kind of hurt doesn't have an expiration date." Catherine looked at him sharply. The wisdom in his young voice caught her off guard. "You sound like you know something about that kind of pain." "I know about losing the one person who made you feel like you mattered." They sat in another stretch of silence, but this one felt different. Less uncomfortable, more shared. Around them, the hospital continued its rhythm of healing and crisis, but their small corner had become an unexpected sanctuary. "Is that why you became a judge?" Deshawn asked. "To make sure justice got served." Catherine considered the question. "I thought so. I wanted to make sure the system worked, that people who hurt others faced consequences. And now I'm not sure what justice looks like anymore." A nurse approached their area, checking her clipboard. "Judge Williams, the doctor wants to see you for a final check before discharge. And Mr. Thompson, your transport has been delayed another hour due to the courthouse situation." When the nurse left, Deshawn shifted on the bench, the cuff clinking against the metal. "Judge Williams, can I ask you something?" "Catherine." "And yes, when you lost your daughter, did you ever think about just giving up? Like, what's the point of trying anymore?" Catherine's breath caught. The question was too close to thoughts she'd had in those dark months after Emma's death, when she'd seriously considered leaving the law entirely. Maybe leaving Chicago, maybe just leaving. "Every day for the first year," she admitted. "Some days I'd sit in my car in the courthouse parking lot and wonder why I was even getting out." "What kept you going?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I wish I could say it was strength or purpose or faith. But honestly, I think it was just stubbornness. I was too angry to quit." "Angry at who?" "Everyone. The drunk driver, the system that let him plea down to manslaughter, God, myself." She paused. "Emma, sometimes, for leaving me." Deshawn nodded slowly. "I was angry at my grandmother, too. For dying. For leaving me alone when she promised she'd always be there. I felt guilty about being mad at someone who loved me, but the anger was real." "It's normal to feel angry at people we love when they leave us," Catherine said, surprised by how naturally the counseling words came. "Even when it's not their choice." "Your daughter, what was she like?" Catherine's eyes misted. She hadn't talked about Emma as a person, not her personality, her quirks, her dreams, in over a decade. She was stubborn, like her mother. A small smile touched Catherine's lips. She wanted to be a veterinarian because she said animals needed lawyers too, to protect them from mean people. She collected those little animal figurines and would set up these elaborate court cases in her room, with the stuffed animals as the jury. Deshawn actually smiled. "Sounds like she got that justice thing from you." "Maybe. Or maybe I got it from her." Catherine felt tears threatening for the first time in years. She used to say that everyone deserved someone to fight for them, even the scary-looking dogs at the shelter. Smart kid. She was. She would have been 20 now, probably in college, changing the world. Maybe she still is, Deshawn said quietly. Changing the world, I mean. Through you. Catherine looked at him, this young man who should be her enemy in the adversarial system, who had just been sentenced to die in prison, and felt something she hadn't experienced in 12 years. Connection. How do you do that? She asked. Do what? Find hope in a hopeless situation. Deshawn was quiet for a moment, watching a family reunion happening across the waiting room, a soldier surprising his kids after deployment. I guess when you ain't got nothing left to lose, you can afford to believe in miracles, he said. Besides, I got this feeling, like my grandmother's still looking out for me somehow. Like this whole thing, even the bad parts, might be leading somewhere I need to go. Catherine felt something shifting inside her, a crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. For the first time in years, she found herself hoping that Deshawn was right. She didn't yet know that his phone call would prove them both right in ways they couldn't imagine. The rain had started falling harder against the windows of Catherine's Lake Forest home, 30 miles north of Chicago. She sat in her study, surrounded by law books and case files, but her mind kept drifting back to that phone call. The way Deshawn's voice cracked when he said, "Mama Kate." The impossible familiarity in those two words. She pulled out the thick manila folder she'd retrieved from her bedroom closet, a folder she hadn't opened in over a decade. Inside were dozens of letters, drawings, and photos from her time as a foster mother in Detroit. Before Emma. Before everything fell apart. Her fingers trembled as she found what she was looking for, a crayon drawing of a house with 2 stick figures. One tall figure labeled Mama Kate, and one small figure labeled Deshawn. At the bottom, in a 7-year-old's careful handwriting, "My new family." The memory hit her like a physical blow. Deshawn Thompson. Not the hardened criminal she'd sentenced that afternoon, but the scared little boy who used to have nightmares about his birth mother's boyfriend. The child who would crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, whispering, "Mama Kate, I'm scared," into her shoulder. Catherine's hand shook as she picked up another photo. Deshawn at 8 years old, grinning toothlessly at Navy Pier during their weekend trip to Chicago. He'd begged her to adopt him that day, right there by Lake Michigan, with the city skyline glittering behind them. "Please, Mama Kate," he'd said, tugging on her coat. "I want to be yours forever and ever." She'd wanted to say yes. God, how she'd wanted to say yes. But then the social worker had called with news about Emma, a baby girl in need of immediate placement, and Catherine's heart had made a choice that haunted her still. Meanwhile, in the Cook County Jail, Deshawn lay on his narrow bunk, staring at the concrete ceiling. The other inmates had given him space after word spread about his sentence. Life without parole at 18. Even hardened criminals respected that kind of finality. But Deshawn wasn't thinking about prison. He was thinking about the woman behind the judge's bench, the way her eyes had widened when he'd said her name. He'd carried that memory for 11 years, the only mother figure he'd ever known, the woman who'd made him believe for 8 precious months that he could have a real family. He remembered the last day he'd seen her, standing in the driveway of her Detroit home with tears streaming down her face. The social worker had explained that Catherine was getting a baby, a real daughter, and there wasn't room for both of them. At 7 years old, Deshawn had understood what the adults wouldn't say. He wasn't good enough to keep. "You'll always be my special boy," Catherine had whispered, hugging him tight. "Never forget that Mama Kate loves you." But as the years passed in a succession of foster homes, some kind, some cruel, most simply indifferent, Deshawn had learned that love was a luxury he couldn't afford to believe in. By the time he aged out of the system at 17, those 8 months with Catherine felt more like a dream than a memory. Back in Lake Forest, Catherine found herself dialing a number she'd memorized years ago but never had the courage to call. Detroit Children's Services. "This is Judge Catherine Williams from Illinois. I need information about a former foster child. Deshawn Thompson. I was his placement in 2014. The social worker on the other end rustled through files. "Oh yes, I remember this case. You were supposed to adopt him, but then you got that emergency baby placement. Emma, wasn't it?" Catherine's throat constricted. "Yes. What happened to Deshawn after?" "After he left my home. Let me see. He went through 6 more placements before aging out. Struggled in school, several arrests as a juvenile. Lost his grandmother, Rose Thompson, 3 years ago. She was trying to get custody of him when she passed from cancer." The words hit Catherine like physical blows. While she'd been building her perfect life with Emma, Deshawn had been shuffled through a system that had failed him at every turn. The little boy who used to help her make pancakes on Sunday mornings had grown up believing no one wanted him. "Judge Williams." The social worker's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you still there?" "Yes, Thank you for the information." Catherine hung up and walked to Emma's old room, which she'd kept exactly as it was the day the accident happened. Pink walls, stuffed animals arranged on the bed, a bookshelf full of stories they'd never finished reading together. She picked up Emma's favorite book, The Giving Tree, and remembered how her daughter used to insist on reading it to my brother Deshawn, even though he was just a picture in their photo album. Emma had been only 6 when Catherine had shown her Deshawn's drawing, explaining that Mama had helped take care of a little boy before Emma came home. "Will I ever meet him?" Emma had asked with the innocent curiosity of a child. "Maybe someday, sweetheart," Catherine had replied, never imagining that someday would come like this. A knock at her front door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in her 60s, wearing a worn coat and carrying a manila envelope. "Judge Williams? My name is Dolores Martinez. I was Deshawn Thompson's caseworker 11 years ago. I saw the news about the trial, and I think there are some things you need to know." Catherine opened the door, her heart pounding. Dolores stepped into the foyer, her kind eyes filled with the weight of difficult truths. "Deshawn never stopped asking about you," Dolores said gently. "Even after all these years, even after everything that happened to him, you were the only placement where he ever felt truly loved." Catherine sank onto her couch as Dolores opened the envelope, revealing a stack of letters written in a child's evolving handwriting. Letters addressed to Mama Kate that had never been sent. "He wrote to you for years," Dolores explained. "The foster families never mailed them. By the time he was in his teens, he'd convinced himself you'd forgotten about him entirely. But Judge Williams, he never forgot you. That little boy's love for you never died, even when everything else in his life fell apart." Catherine's hand shook as she read the first letter, dated just 6 months after Deshawn had left her home. "Dear Mama Kate, I miss you so much. My new family is okay, but they don't make pancakes like you. Did you forget about me? I try to be good, so maybe I can come home. I still have the bear you gave me. I love you. Deshawn. Tears blurred Catherine's vision as she saw the progression through the years. Hope gradually fading into resignation, but never into hatred. Even in the final letter, written when he was 16, there was still love. Dear Mama Kate, I know you probably have your real daughter now and don't think about me anymore. But I wanted you to know I remember everything you taught me about being strong and kind. I mess up sometimes, but I try to remember your voice telling me I'm special. I hope you're happy. I hope your little girl knows how lucky she is. Love always, Deshawn. Oh God, Catherine whispered, clutching the letters to her chest. What have I done? Dolores sat beside her, her voice gentle but firm. You made a choice that seemed right at the time. But Judge Williams, that boy is sitting in a cell tonight because he never learned he was worthy of love. The system failed him, yes, but he's been carrying the wound of losing you for 11 years. Catherine looked up, tears streaming down her face. How do I fix this? How do I fix what I broke? I don't know if you can, Dolores said honestly. But maybe you can try to give him what he's always needed. The truth about why you let him go, and the love that never really left. Outside, the storm intensified, battering the windows of Catherine's perfect suburban home, a home that suddenly felt as empty as the space in her heart where a little boy's laughter used to live. In his cell at Cook County, Deshawn stared at the ceiling, unaware that 40 miles north, the woman he'd never stopped loving was finally learning the cost of the choice she'd made so long ago. The truth was about to change everything. But first, both of them would have to find the courage to face the past they'd both been running from. The next morning brought unexpected warmth to Chicago, as if the city itself was offering a reprieve from the harsh winter that had gripped it for months. Catherine found herself walking through Millennium Park, something she hadn't done since Emma was alive. The Crown Fountain was quiet, its digital faces cycling through images of strangers, and she wondered if her daughter's face would have appeared there by now, had she lived to see 20. She'd barely slept after yesterday's revelation. The birth certificate, the sealed adoption records her private investigator had managed to locate, it all pointed to an impossible truth. The son she'd given up for adoption 21 years ago, the baby she'd held for exactly 17 minutes before signing the papers, was sitting in a prison cell because of her decision. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant, Deshawn Thompson's attorney, requesting an emergency meeting. Says it's urgent. Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the morning sun on her face. For the first time in 12 years, she wasn't sure if she had the strength to do what the law required. 3 miles away, in the Cook County Jail, Deshawn sat across from his attorney in a cramped conference room. Michael Rodriguez had been working pro bono cases for 15 years, but he'd never had a case quite like this one. Deshawn, I need you to listen carefully, Michael said, sliding a manila folder across the metal table. After your phone call yesterday, I did some digging. What I found, it changes everything. Deshawn's hands were steady as he opened the folder, but his heart was racing. Inside were photocopies of documents he'd never seen before, a birth certificate with his name, listing a mother as Catherine M. Patterson, Patterson being Judge Williams' maiden name. My mama. Deshawn whispered, tracing the signature on the adoption papers. She was 17. A senior in high school in Detroit, Michael confirmed. Star student. Full scholarship to Northwestern Law School waiting for her. The father. There's no name listed, but from what I can piece together, he was older. Much older. She made the hardest decision a 17-year-old could make. Deshaun stared at the documents, his mind reeling. So when I called her chambers yesterday and said, "Mama," she knew, Michael said gently. The question is, what do we do now? 2 hours later, Catherine stood outside the Cook County Jail, her hands trembling as she held her security clearance card. She'd used her judicial privileges to arrange this meeting, though she wasn't entirely sure it was legal or wise. The visiting room was sterile and cold, divided by thick plexiglass. When Deshaun walked in, still in his orange jumpsuit but without the shackles, Catherine's breath caught in her throat. 21 years had passed, but she could see traces of the baby she'd held. The same deep brown eyes, the same stubborn set to his jaw that she saw in her own mirror. They sat in silence for a long moment, the phone receivers heavy in their hands. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Deshaun said finally. "I wasn't sure I would either," Catherine admitted. Her voice sounded different without the authority of the bench. Smaller, more human. "Deshaun, You don't have to explain," he interrupted gently. "I read the files. You were 17. You had your whole life ahead of you." Catherine felt tears she hadn't shed in years threatening to surface. "I held you for 17 minutes. The longest and shortest 17 minutes of my life. I memorized your face, your little hands. I made myself remember everything because I knew it would be the only time." Deshaun pressed his palm against the glass. After a moment, Catherine matched it with her own, their hands separated by barriers that felt both insurmountable and paper-thin. "I used to wonder," Deshaun said, his voice soft, "what she looked like, what she sounded like. If she ever thought about me. I never imagined." He managed a small smile. "I never imagined she'd be the one deciding my fate." "I think about you every day," Catherine whispered. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I see a young man your age. I wondered if you were safe, if you were loved, if you were happy." "I had good moments," Deshaun said. "Grandma Rose, my foster grandmother, she loved me hard for 10 years. Taught me to read, made sure I knew right from wrong. She used to say, 'My mama must have been something special to make such a beautiful baby.'" Catherine's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. She was right. "You are beautiful. You are so much more than what that courtroom saw." "Mama," Deshaun said the word like a prayer, "I ain't gonna lie to you. I did wrong. I made choices that hurt people. But I ain't a monster. I was just lost." "I know, baby," Catherine said, the endearment slipping out naturally. "I know you're not." They talked for 3 hours, about his childhood in foster care, her rise through the legal system, the parallel lives they'd lived in the same city without knowing it. Catherine learned about his love for reading, inherited from Grandma Rose. Deshaun learned about Emma, the daughter Catherine had raised and lost, and understood why his mother's heart had been so heavily guarded. "You know I can't overturn the verdict," Catherine said as their time ran short. "I'm bound by the law, by ethics." "I know," Deshaun said. "But this? Getting to know you, getting to understand. It's more than I ever dreamed possible. For the first time in my life, I feel like I belong to somebody." Catherine stood to leave, but Deshawn's voice stopped her. "Mama, can I ask you something?" She turned back, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. "Do you think it's possible for someone like me to find redemption? Even behind bars?" Catherine looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw not the defendant from her courtroom, but the baby she'd kissed goodbye 21 years ago, now grown into a young man with her eyes and a strength she could barely comprehend. "Yes," she said firmly. "I believe in redemption. And I believe in you." As she walked away, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced since Emma died. Hope. Not the naive kind, but the hard-won hope that comes from finding love in the most impossible places. Behind the glass, Deshawn watched his mother disappear down the corridor, and for the first time since Grandma Rose's funeral, he wasn't alone. The silence in Catherine's chambers felt suffocating. 3 days had passed since Deshawn's release, and the media storm was relentless. CNN had camped outside the Chicago courthouse, while Fox News ran segments questioning her judicial competence. The Illinois State Bar had launched an investigation into her conduct. But it wasn't the professional scrutiny that was tearing her apart. It was the look in Deshawn's eyes when he'd walked out of that courtroom. The same look Emma used to give her when she'd broken a promise. Catherine stared at the resignation letter on her desk, her signature halfway complete. Outside her window, Lake Michigan stretched gray and endless under storm clouds that had rolled in from Wisconsin. Her phone buzzed incessantly. Reporters, colleagues, political allies distancing themselves from the bleeding heart judge who lost her mind. A sharp knock interrupted her spiral. "Come in." Deshawn entered hesitantly, wearing the same donated clothes from his release. Jeans that didn't quite fit and a Chicago Bulls hoodie that had seen better days. His eyes were red-rimmed, and Catherine could see the tremor in his hands. "They said I could see you," he said quietly. "I know I probably shouldn't be here, but—" "Sit down, son." The word slipped out before she could stop it, and both of them froze. Deshawn took the chair across from her desk, the same one where they'd sat together that first evening after the phone call revelation. But now, the warmth that had blossomed between them felt strained, fragile. "I've been staying at a shelter in Brooklyn," he said, naming the neighborhood on Chicago's South Side where he'd grown up. "Been trying to find work, but—" He gestured helplessly. "Turns out having your face on every news channel as the kid who might have manipulated a judge doesn't help with job interviews." Catherine's heart clenched. "Deshawn, I want you to know that what happened in that courtroom was a mistake." His voice was flat, defeated. "I get it, Judge Williams. You were caught up in the moment. You thought you were saving your daughter's son, but I ain't him. I never was." The words hit her like physical blows. "That's not true. Isn't it?" Deshawn's voice rose, pain bleeding through his composure. "You think I don't see what's happening? You think I don't know that every legal expert in the country is saying you lost your damn mind? That you threw away your career for some fantasy connection to a dead girl?" Catherine flinched. "Don't you dare." "Don't I dare what?" "Tell the truth." Deshawn stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You know what the worst part is? For like 2 seconds I actually believed it. I believed that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this world. That maybe someone actually gave a shit about Deshawn Thompson, not just some symbol of your guilt." His voice cracked on the last word, and Catherine saw the 18-year-old boy beneath the anger, the child who'd been abandoned so many times he'd stopped believing in permanence. "I do care about you," Catherine whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Deshawn laughed bitterly. "Yeah. Then why are you sitting here writing your resignation instead of fighting for me? Why are you giving up on yourself the same way everyone gave up on me?" Catherine looked down at the half-signed letter, shame burning in her chest. "Because I've destroyed everything. My career, my reputation, Your what? Your comfortable life where you get to play God from behind that bench without actually getting your hands dirty." Deshawn's words were sharp, surgical. "You know what I realized these past 3 days? You didn't save me because you saw Emma in me. You saved me because saving me made you feel better about failing her." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Catherine felt something inside her chest cave in, the truth of his words hitting deeper than any professional censure. "That's not—" She started, but the words died in her throat. "I thought so," Deshawn said quietly. "I thought you were different. I thought you actually saw me. But you just saw a chance to play the hero with your dead daughter's memory." He turned toward the door, and Catherine felt panic rise in her throat. "Deshawn, wait. Please." He paused but didn't turn around. "You know what the saddest part is? I actually started to hope. I started to think that maybe I could be someone's son again. Started to imagine what it would feel like to have somebody choose me for real this time." His shoulders shook, and Catherine realized he was crying. Silent tears that spoke of a lifetime of disappointment. "But this ain't a fairy tale, is it? And you ain't really my mama. You're just a judge who made a mistake and now you're paying for it." "Deshawn, don't." His voice was raw. "Just don't. I'll be fine. I always am. I'll figure out how to survive this like I figured out how to survive everything else. Alone." He reached for the door handle, and Catherine felt something desperate and a wild tear through her chest. "I was afraid." The words exploded out of her. "I was terrified that if I let myself love you the way I loved her, I'd lose you too. Because that's what I do. I lose everyone I love." Deshawn stopped, his hand frozen on the door. "You think I don't see you?" Catherine's voice cracked. "You think I don't know that you put extra sugar in your coffee because your grandmother used to make it that way? That you still check the obituaries every morning hoping someone, somewhere, might be looking for you? That you read legal briefs in the library because you want to understand the system that failed you?" She was standing now, tears streaming down her face. "You think I don't know that you've been sleeping on park benches because you gave your shelter bed to a pregnant girl who needed it more? That you've been eating 1 meal a day so you could save enough money to buy flowers for your grandmother's grave?" Deshawn's shoulders began to shake harder. "I see all of it, son. Every brave, beautiful, broken piece of you. And yes, maybe I was trying to heal my own wounds, but that doesn't make what I feel for you any less real." The silence stretched between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. Finally, Deshawn turned around, his face wet with tears. "Then why does it feel like you're giving up on us?" Catherine looked at her resignation letter, then at the young man standing in her doorway, the son she'd found and was terrified of losing. "Because," she whispered, "I don't know how to be anyone's mother without Emma teaching me how." The admission hung between them like a bridge made of glass, beautiful and terrifying and so very fragile. When someone you care about challenges your motives, how do you respond? Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and fighting for someone else? Let us know what you think in the comments. Deshaun took one step back into the room, then stopped, his hand still on the doorframe. The choice that would define both their futures hung in the balance, waiting for one of them to be brave enough to reach across the divide their fears had created. The silence in Judge Catherine Williams' chambers felt heavier than the Chicago snow falling outside her window. It was 11:30 p.m., and the courthouse corridors echoed with emptiness, but sleep was impossible. She sat at her desk, Emma's photo turned face down, unable to bear her daughter's innocent smile while wrestling with the magnitude of what she'd discovered. Deshaun was her grandson. The DNA results lay scattered across her mahogany desk alongside the private investigator's report she'd commissioned after that devastating phone call 6 hours ago. Michael Thompson, the son she'd given up for adoption at 17, had died 3 years ago, but not before fathering a child with a young woman who died in childbirth. That child had been Deshaun, bounced through foster care, never knowing his father's name or that his biological grandmother sat on the federal bench in Chicago. Catherine's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. She'd been staring at Deshaun's contact information for 2 hours, the number he'd been allowed to keep as his one personal call from Cook County Jail. The boy, her grandson, was scheduled for transport to Stateville Correctional Center at 6 a.m. Once those doors closed, the system would swallow him whole. What kind of judge am I? What kind of grandmother? The irony cut deep. She'd spent 15 years sending young black men to prison, telling herself she was serving justice, never questioning if the system itself was just. Now her own blood was caught in the machinery she'd helped operate. Her phone buzzed with a text from Deshaun. "Judge Williams, I know this is crazy, but I found something else. My grandmother Rose kept letters. Letters from my birth father's mother. Someone named Catherine who became a judge. She said she regretted giving him up every day. I think God wanted us to find each other before it was too late." Catherine's breath caught. Rose Thompson, Deshaun's adoptive grandmother, had been Michael's foster mother after Catherine gave him up. The woman had somehow traced the connection and kept Catherine's letters, the one she'd written to Michael through the adoption agency, hoping they'd reach him someday. Another text arrived with a photo attachment. Catherine's vision blurred as she recognized her own handwriting from 18 years ago. "My dear son, if you ever read this, know that not a day passes that I don't think of you. I was 17, scared, and thought I was giving you a better chance. I became a judge hoping to help kids like you. Love always, your mother, Catherine." The phone slipped from her numb fingers. Michael had kept her letters, had read them, had maybe even told Deshaun about the grandmother he'd never met. Catherine stood on shaking legs and walked to her window, looking out over the lights of downtown Chicago. Somewhere across the city, in a cold jail cell, her grandson was probably lying awake too, wondering if his one desperate gamble had meant anything. She thought about Emma, her daughter who died at 8, and how she'd promised herself she'd never fail another child. Yet here was another child, her own blood, and the system she served was about to devour him. "You can't save everyone," the practical voice in her head whispered. "You're a federal judge. There are rules, procedures, ethics committees." But louder was another voice, one that sounded like Emma. "But you can save him, Mama. You can save this one." Catherine picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. Marcus Reed, her former law clerk who now worked for the Illinois Innocence Project. She'd helped him get the job 5 years ago after he'd challenged her on a case, arguing that mandatory minimums were destroying families. Her finger hovered over the call button. Once she made this choice, there would be no going back. She'd have to recuse herself from Deshawn's case, face the Ethics Review Board, possibly sacrifice her career. The news media would have a field day. Federal judge's secret connection to convicted felon. But then she thought about Deshawn's voice on that phone call, the way he'd said Grandma Katie like a prayer, like hope itself. She thought about Michael, the son she'd given away, and how he'd somehow raised a boy who still believed in second chances even while facing life in prison. What would Emma want me to do? The answer came swift and certain. Catherine dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy with sleep. Judge Williams? Is everything okay? Marcus, Catherine said, her voice steady for the first time in hours. I need your help. There's a case, a wrongful sentencing, and I think there might be grounds for immediate appeal based on new evidence and potential judicial conflict of interest. At midnight. Judge, what's going on? Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 15 years of rigid justice lifting from her shoulders. I'm about to do something that might cost me my career, but it's the right thing to do. Can you meet me at the courthouse in an hour? I'll be there in 30 minutes. After hanging up, Catherine called her administrative assistant, then the clerk of courts, then the warden at Cook County. By 2 a.m., she'd set in motion a series of legal maneuvers that would halt Deshawn's transfer and request an emergency hearing based on newly discovered evidence of familial conflict of interest. As dawn broke over Lake Michigan, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and pink, Catherine sat in her car outside Cook County Jail. In 20 minutes, she would walk inside not as a federal judge, but as a grandmother meeting her grandson for the first time. She pulled out her phone and sent one final text to Deshawn. I'm coming, sweetheart. Grandma Katie is coming. The reply came instantly. I knew you would. I could hear it in your voice. You sound just like my dad described in his letters. Catherine pressed the phone to her chest and allowed herself to cry. For Michael, for Emma, for all the years lost, and for the chance to finally get justice right. Have you ever had to choose between what's safe and what's right? Sometimes love requires us to risk everything. What would you have done in Judge Williams' position? 6 months later, the same Chicago courthouse buzzed with an energy Catherine Williams had never experienced in her 15 years on the bench. The media had dubbed it the miracle case, but sitting in her chambers, looking at the young man across from her desk, no longer in shackles, no longer in orange, she knew it was something far more profound than a miracle. Deshawn sat in a pressed navy suit, his posture confident but respectful. The transformation wasn't just physical, though the 20 pounds he'd gained back had filled out his face, making him look less like a scared kid and more like the young man he was becoming. It was something in his eyes, a light that hadn't been there before. Are you ready for this? Catherine asked, smoothing down her robes. Today marked the official ceremony where Deshawn would be sworn in as the youngest community outreach coordinator in the history of Chicago's juvenile justice system. Yes, ma'am, Deshawn smiled, and Catherine's heart swelled with a pride she'd thought she'd buried with Emma. Though I gotta admit, walking back into that courtroom feels different now. Catherine stood, checking her reflection in the mirror one last time. The woman looking back at her was different too, softer somehow, more alive. The rigid mask of judicial authority had been replaced by something warmer, more human. "Deshaun," she said, turning to face him. "Before we go out there, I need you to know something." He looked up at her expectantly. "That day when you made that phone call, when you called Emma's phone and somehow reached me." Catherine's voice caught slightly. "I thought it was the cruelest twist of fate, a reminder of everything I'd lost. But you weren't just reaching for help that day. You were saving me too." Deshaun stood, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mom, you saved yourself. You just let me help." The word "mom" still sent a shock of joy through Catherine's system. It had taken months of therapy, legal proceedings, and careful conversations. But the adoption had been finalized 3 weeks ago. Deshaun Thompson was now officially Deshaun Williams, and Catherine was no longer just Judge Williams. She was someone's mother again. "We saved each other," she corrected, reaching out to straighten his tie. It was navy blue with small gold scales of justice, a gift from his new colleagues at the community center in Englewood where he now worked with at-risk youth. A knock at the door interrupted them. "Judge Williams? They're ready for you both." Catherine took a deep breath. "Ready, son. Ready, Mom." They walked together down the same hallway where 6 months ago, Deshaun had shuffled in chains. Now their footsteps echoed in harmony. Confident, purposeful, heading toward something beautiful. The courtroom was packed. Representatives from the NAACP, city council members, youth advocates, and dozens of kids from the Englewood Center filled every seat. But Catherine's eyes found the faces that mattered most. Dr. Maria Santos from the community center, beaming with pride, Attorney Johnson, who had worked tirelessly on Deshaun's case, and in the front row, Mrs. Eleanor Washington, Deshaun's former foster mother who had driven up from Springfield to witness this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. 6 months ago, this courtroom was the site of what appeared to be an ending. Today, it celebrates the beginning. She looked at Deshaun, standing tall beside the witness stand where he'd once faced a life sentence. Deshaun Williams has not only transformed his own life, but through his work with Chicago's youth intervention programs, he's helping to transform the lives of others. His story reminds us that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about redemption, second chances, and the power of human connection to heal even the deepest wounds. The crowd erupted in applause, but Catherine raised her hand for quiet. "But this moment belongs to you, Deshaun. Tell them what you want them to know." Deshaun stepped forward, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Many of them young, brown faces like his own, faces full of hope and possibility. 6 months ago, I stood in this same spot and heard the word life. He began, his voice strong and clear. I thought that was my ending. But sometimes, the thing that looks like your ending is actually your beginning. He paused, looking at Catherine with a smile that transformed his entire face. I want every young person in here to know that your circumstances don't define your destiny. I want every adult to know that sometimes the kids who seem the most lost are just looking for someone to believe in them. And I want everyone to understand that family isn't just about blood, it's about love, commitment, and choosing to see the best in each other even when it's hard. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't care. This was what healing looked like. This was what love looked like when it was allowed to grow in impossible soil. The phone call that changed my life wasn't to a lawyer or a politician or anyone who could pull strings, Deshawn continued. It was to heaven, hoping my little sister Emma was listening. Instead, I reached the woman who would become my mother, who was still grieving Emma's loss but had enough love left to save a broken kid like me. He turned to Catherine. Mom, will you do the honors? Catherine stepped forward, holding the certificate that would officially make Deshawn a community outreach coordinator. But more than that, it was a symbol of transformation. From defendant to advocate, from lost to found, from broken to whole. Deshawn Williams, she said, her voice ringing with joy, by the power vested in me by the state of Illinois and more importantly, by the love that binds us as family, I officially recognize you as a voice for justice, an advocate for hope, and a living testament to the power of second chances. As she handed him the certificate, Deshawn pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home. The courtroom exploded in cheers and applause, but Catherine could only hear the sound of her own heart beating with a rhythm she'd forgotten, the rhythm of a mother's love. Later, at the celebration dinner at a soul food restaurant in Bronzeville, Catherine watched Deshawn interact with the kids from the center. His story had already prevented 3 young men from making the same mistakes he'd made. His presence in their lives was proof that change was possible, that the system could work when it was infused with love instead of just law. Judge Williams, said Malik, a 15-year-old from the program, Deshawn told us you were the one who really listened when nobody else would. Thank you for seeing him when everyone else just saw a criminal. Catherine smiled, watching Deshawn laugh with a group of teenagers by the window. The Chicago skyline twinkled behind them, the same view that had seemed so distant and impossible 6 months ago. I didn't save Deshawn, she told Malik. He saved me. And now he's saving all of you. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Deshawn approached her with something in his hand, a small, wrapped package. What's this? Catherine asked. Open it. Inside was a small silver frame containing 2 photos side by side. One of Emma at age 8, pigtails and bright smile intact, and one of Deshawn at his swearing-in ceremony that morning, wearing the same bright smile. I know I can't replace Emma, Deshawn said quietly. But maybe love doesn't have to end when someone leaves. Maybe it just makes room for more. Catherine looked at the photos, her daughter and her son, connected by love and loss and the mysterious ways that broken hearts can heal each other. Emma would have loved you, she whispered. I know she did, Deshawn replied. She led me to you. That night, Catherine sat in her home office in Lincoln Park, looking out at Lake Michigan and working on a new initiative, a program that would pair judges with youth advocates to create more pathways from punishment to redemption. Deshawn's case had opened her eyes to the possibilities that existed when the justice system led with love instead of just law. Her phone buzzed with a text from Deshawn. Good night, Mom. Thank you for teaching me that family isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every day. Catherine smiled, typing back. Good night, son. Thank you for teaching me that love multiplies when we share it. She closed her laptop and walked to the mantel where 2 photos now sat side by side. Emma and Deshawn, her children, both of whom had taught her different lessons about love, loss, and the courage to keep her heart open even when it hurt. Outside, Chicago hummed with life. Millions of stories intersecting, breaking apart, and coming together in ways both mysterious and beautiful. In a courthouse across town, the same courtroom where Deshawn had once faced life in prison now bore a small plaque, the Emma Williams Memorial Courtroom, where justice and mercy meet. And in a small apartment in Englewood, 3 teenagers who had been on the same path Deshaun once walked sat around a kitchen table, working on college applications with the help of a young man who had once been lost but had found his way home. Looking at Deshaun and Catherine's journey, what does family mean to you? How have unexpected relationships in your own life led to growth and healing? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Love, it seemed, had indeed found its way at last. Thanks for sticking with this story till the very end. But trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The next story is crazier, more shocking, and will blow your mind. Click the image on your screen now and dive right in. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a single twist.